She played with a quiet confidence, letting the music flow naturally. Her fingers moved across the strings with precision and grace, each note carrying emotion that reached deep into the hearts of the listeners. The melody grew more complex, yet it never felt forced or artificial. It was as if the music itself was alive, guiding both her hands and the audience through a journey that no one could have predicted. People sat in rapt attention, unable to look away, drawn into a story unfolding through sound. The audience began to feel the full weight of her performance. Some closed their eyes, letting the music wash over them completely. Others watched her closely, fascinated by the subtlety and skill behind every note. They realized that this was not merely a display of technical ability. It was an expression of something profoundly human. Each note seemed to convey emotion, memory, and experience all at once, creating a connection that transcended words. Whispers of awe and disbelief began to ripple quietly through the audience. "I didn't know music could do that," one person murmured. Another shook their head, unable to form words, overwhelmed by the depth of feeling the performance evoked. Even those who had come with casual curiosity were now completely engaged, experiencing the music in a way they had never anticipated. The simple tune had transformed into a powerful force. Capable of moving an entire room without a single word spoken, she allowed the music to breathe, incorporating pauses and subtle variations that heightened the emotional impact. Each note resonated with purpose, and the silence between notes spoke just as loudly. The audience could feel the tension and release, the ebb and flow of emotion as the melody unfolded. Some people pressed their hands to their chests, their hearts beating in time with the rhythm of the music. Others leaned forward, eyes closed, completely absorbed in the sound. The room was united in a shared experience, yet each person felt it in a deeply personal way. As the performance progressed, the music began to climb in intensity. The tune, still simple in its structure, became a vessel for profound emotion. It carried joy, sorrow, hope, and longing all at once, creating a rich tapestry that engaged the audience completely. They were no longer merely listening. They were living the music. Every note seemed to tell a story. Every pause allowed them to reflect on their own experiences, and every subtle variation deepened the impact. The performance was becoming something transformative. Some audience members found themselves overwhelmed by the beauty and honesty of the music. A woman quietly wiped tears from her eyes, moved by memories stirred by the melody. A man leaned back in his chair, exhaling slowly, as if releasing the emotion that had built up within him. Others simply sat, wide-eyed and silent, unable to process the intensity of what they were experiencing. The simple tune had become a powerful conduit for human emotion. Connecting everyone in the room in a shared moment of wonder, she introduced subtle dynamics that added layers of complexity to the performance. Small crescendos, delicate flourishes, and slight shifts in tempo kept the audience engaged, making each moment feel fresh and unpredictable. The music was alive, responding to her touch and guiding the listeners through a journey that was both intimate and universal. People felt as if they were part of the story, experiencing the highs and lows, the tension and release alongside the performer. The room was filled with quiet energy, a collective understanding that they were witnessing something rare and extraordinary. As the tune reached its peak, the emotional impact intensified. The audience could feel the power of the performance in their bodies, in their hearts, in the very air around them. Some people held their hands to their faces, overwhelmed by the depth of feeling the music evoked. Others leaned forward, eyes closed, completely immersed in the experience. The energy in the room was palpable, a shared acknowledgement of the talent, emotion, and authenticity behind every note. The simple tune had become a force that could not be ignored. She continued to play with unwavering focus, letting the music speak for itself. There was no need for words, no need for dramatic gestures. The audience responded instinctively, captivated by the honesty and beauty of the performance. Each person experienced the music in their own way, yet all were united in their admiration and awe. The room had become a sacred space, a place where human emotion and connection were expressed through the language of music alone. The melody began to wind down slightly, but the emotional intensity remained. Listeners were on edge, waiting for the final notes that would bring the performance to its climax. The tune had taken them on a journey, and they were fully engaged, eager to experience the conclusion. The anticipation was electric, a quiet energy that filled every corner of the room. People leaned forward, held their breath, and allowed themselves to be carried along by the music. As the final moments approached, she introduced subtle variations that heightened the impact even further. The melody became more expressive, more nuanced, and more powerful. Each note resonated with emotion, each pause allowed the audience to reflect, and each change in dynamics kept them fully engaged. The room was silent, yet alive with anticipation and wonder. Everyone knew they were witnessing something extraordinary, something that would stay with them long after the performance ended. The final notes lingered in the air, delicate and precise. The audience remained still for a moment, absorbing the resonance and the emotion of the performance. Then, slowly, the room began to react. Applause erupted, loud and heartfelt, filling the space with energy and excitement. People rose to their feet, cheering and clapping, their expressions a mixture of awe, admiration, and disbelief. The performance had exceeded all expectations. Leaving the audience stunned and deeply moved, she lowered her instrument gently, a quiet smile on her face. She did not rush to speak, did not seek attention or praise. The music had spoken for her, and the audience responded naturally. People continued to applaud, some with tears in their eyes, others with wide smiles, all acknowledging the remarkable talent and emotional depth they had just witnessed. The simple tune had transformed into a performance that shocked, captivated, and inspired every person in the room as the applause continued. Whispers of admiration and disbelief spread through the crowd. People discussed the subtle mastery, the emotional resonance, and the surprising depth of the performance. They marveled at how a simple tune could carry such power, how a quiet and unassuming musician could command attention and move hearts so profoundly. The room was filled with a sense of shared experience, a collective understanding that they had witnessed something truly special. She quietly stepped back, allowing the audience to absorb the moment. The energy in the room was a mixture of excitement, awe, and reverence. People continued to talk among themselves, sharing their reactions and impressions. But all of it was rooted in the same recognition. They had been present for an extraordinary experience. The simple tune had revealed its hidden depth, and the audience was left in shock and admiration. Unable to forget what they had just heard, the performance had reached its emotional peak, and the impact was undeniable. Every listener had been affected in some way, whether through tears, quiet reflection, or joyful amazement. The room had been transformed by the music, united in a shared experience that transcended words. The simple tune had become a powerful force, capable of inspiring, moving, and shocking an entire audience. It was a moment that would remain in their hearts and minds long after they left the room. As she stepped away from her instrument, the audience continued to applaud, some rising to their feet, others clapping enthusiastically. The energy was electric, a testament to the power of her performance and the emotional journey she had guided them through. People were talking excitedly, sharing their awe and admiration. Yet the performance had created a sense of intimacy and connection that lingered. Everyone knew they had witnessed something extraordinary, something rare, something unforgettable. She stood quietly, allowing the applause and admiration to wash over the room without seeking it. Her expression remained calm, her focus still on the music even as it ended. The audience was left in stunned silence, gradually transitioning to excitement, awe, and heartfelt appreciation. The simple tune had done more than entertain. It had touched the hearts of everyone present, creating a moment of shared humanity that would be remembered long after the evening ended. As the applause slowly died down, quiet stillness returned to the room. It was not the same as before her performance. This silence was full of thought, reflection, and awe. The audience lingered in their seats, still absorbing the emotions that the simple tune had stirred in them. People exchanged looks, nodding and smiling at one another, sharing a wordless understanding of what they had just experienced. Something extraordinary had happened, and it would not be forgotten. She stood calmly, allowing the moment to settle. She did not bow extravagantly, did not speak unnecessarily. She simply held herself with quiet grace, letting the music she had played speak louder than any words could. Those who had doubted her or expected something ordinary were now in complete admiration. The simple tune had revealed a story, a depth, and an emotional richness that had completely changed the perception of her skill and presence. She did not rush, and she did not seek applause. Her movements were precise, but they were soft and unassuming. Her fingers moved across the strings in a way that seemed effortless, yet every note told a story. The audience, now fully silent, began to sense that this was no ordinary performance. The simple tune had evolved layer by layer into something profound. People were caught off guard, unsure whether they were witnessing skill, emotion, or both entwined seamlessly. The music started to stretch into unexpected directions. A soft, lingering note here, a subtle shift in rhythm there, and suddenly the tune that had seemed familiar now felt alive and unpredictable. Listeners could feel the tension and release, the rise and fall of emotion, all without words or dramatic gestures. Each person reacted differently. Some closed their eyes, some leaned forward, some let out tiny gasps as the melody wrapped around their senses. The performance became more than entertainment. It was an experience. It's intimate and personal for each individual present. A few people tried to imagine how she could produce such emotion from such a simple instrument. Their minds raced to connect the technical skill with the feelings it evoked, yet the two seemed inseparable. The music itself had a life of its own, and she was merely the guide, letting it flow naturally through her. People realized they had been wrong to underestimate her. What seemed simple at the beginning had revealed itself to be deliberate, masterful, and deeply moving. Her pauses became more meaningful as the tune progressed. In those brief moments of silence, the audience felt the resonance of each note echoing within themselves. Some hearts beat faster, some slower, some people held their breath. The room was united in a quiet, almost sacred tension. She had found a rhythm that spoke directly to the human heart, bypassing words entirely. This was a language everyone could understand, and yet no one could explain in full. The melody began to develop a narrative quality. Listeners could imagine scenes unfolding in their minds, stories of love, loss, hope, and quiet triumph. Each note added a brushstroke to the picture, creating layers of meaning that seemed to shift with every passing moment. The audience felt that the music was alive, responding to their attention, drawing them further in with every sound. They were no longer merely spectators. They were participants in the unfolding story. Some of the older members of the audience, who had initially been skeptical, were now leaning forward, completely absorbed. A man quietly wiped a tear from his eye, though he did so as unobtrusively as possible. A woman in the front row clutched her hands together, as if holding herself steady against the wave of emotion that had taken over. Even those who had come with casual curiosity were now fully engaged, unable to look away or turn their attention elsewhere. She had captured them completely. The subtle complexity of her playing became increasingly apparent. Tiny variations in the melody, minute shifts in timing, and delicate flourishes that had been unnoticed before now emerged. Each small change added depth and nuance, demonstrating her command over the instrument and her understanding of how to convey emotion through music. The audience felt privileged to witness it, sensing that they were watching someone at the peak of her ability. Fully immersed and yet unassuming, she maintained a quiet presence, never drawing attention to herself, letting the music speak. The audience, in turn, gave their attention fully, some even unconsciously leaning closer. They had become part of an invisible circle, bound together by the resonance of her performance. Each person experienced it differently, yet everyone shared the same sense of wonder and amazement. It was a rare kind of connection, both private and collective, forged in the silence between notes and the spaces that music created. As the tune progressed, it began to shift moods subtly, moving from melancholy to hopefulness, from tension to release. Listeners felt a journey within the performance, a movement that was both emotional and spiritual. Some people closed their eyes, letting memories and feelings flow through them. Others watched her intently, fascinated by how she managed to convey such richness with a simple instrument and seemingly effortless technique. The balance between technical skill and raw emotion was remarkable, and the audience sensed it instinctively. She introduced moments of unexpected dynamics, notes that rose just slightly above the rest, drawing attention without overpowering the melody. These moments made listeners lean in unconsciously, hanging on each sound, each pause. The performance had become immersive, a world that existed only in that room and in the hearts of those present. Time seemed to stretch. Minutes felt longer, yet fleeting, as if the music itself controlled the flow of reality. Every person in the room felt connected, not only to the music, but to each other. The shared experience was palpable. Even without speaking, people understood that something extraordinary was happening. The tune had begun as a simple melody, but it had transformed into a vessel for emotion, memory, and human connection. The beauty lay in its honesty, its ability to evoke genuine feeling without theatrics or exaggeration. The audience sensed the sincerity behind every note, and that made the experience all the more moving. She played with patience, allowing each segment of the tune to breathe fully. The audience, now completely captivated, responded subconsciously. Some shifting slightly in their seats, some holding their hands together, some simply sitting in stillness. Each person absorbed the performance in their own way, yet all were united in admiration and wonder. The room was alive, yet quiet, a paradox created by the magnetic pull of her music. The narrative arc of the tune became more distinct as she progressed. There were moments of tension where listeners felt the emotion heighten, and moments of release where relief and peace washed over them. The ebb and flow of feeling created a roller coaster of subtle, intimate experiences. Some listeners felt their hearts swell with joy. Others felt a quiet ache of nostalgia. Each person experienced the music differently, yet the collective reaction was one of stunned recognition and deep appreciation. As she approached the final section of Part 3, the melody became even more expressive. Small flourishes, slight crescendos, and delicate pauses heightened the emotional impact. Listeners were fully engaged, leaning forward, holding their breath, or closing their eyes to absorb the depth of feeling. The room was a shared space of awe, quiet yet intensely alive. Each individual felt the weight of the performance, the care and intention behind every note. And the unspoken story being told through sound, the audience began to whisper softly among themselves, though always quietly, as if they did not want to disturb the spell. They commented on the subtle mastery the emotion conveyed, and the surprising depth of a performance that had seemed simple at the outset. It was a rare and special moment, a convergence of skill, emotion, and presence that left a lasting impression. Each listener was aware that they were witnessing something exceptional, something that would remain with them for a long time. Her playing continued with controlled intensity, never overwhelming, never abrupt, yet commanding full attention. Every note, pause, and gesture was intentional, contributing to the overall story of the tune. The audience felt as if they were part of the unfolding narrative, carried along by the music and by the quiet power of her presence. The room seemed suspended in time, the only reality being the connection between the musician, her music, and the listeners. As Part 3 drew to its close, the final notes lingered in the air, delicate and purposeful. The audience remained still for a moment, absorbing the resonance before the room slowly began to react. Eyes opened, faces softened, and some exhaled, as if releasing the emotion the music had evoked. The impact was undeniable. What had started as a simple tune had transformed into an unforgettable experience, leaving listeners astonished by the depth, skill, and honesty of the performance. She lowered her instrument slowly, her expression calm, her body relaxed. She had taken them through a journey that none of them had anticipated. The room was buzzing with quiet energy, a shared understanding that they had just witnessed something rare and profound. The skepticism, the doubts, and the underestimation were gone. In their place was respect, admiration, and a growing sense of awe. The simple tune had revealed its hidden depths, and the audience was forever changed by the experience. They had been surprised, captivated, and moved. And they knew that what would happen next would only heighten the wonder they were already feeling the moment she began the next section of her performance. The room seemed to hold its breath in anticipation. Everyone who had been captivated before was now fully invested. Leaning forward in their seats, eyes wide, hearts quietly racing, the simple tune, which had already surprised and impressed them, was about to reveal an even greater depth, and the audience sensed it instinctively. The air felt heavy with emotion, as if everyone in the room knew that something extraordinary was about to happen. She began to play again, and immediately the tune felt different. There was a shift in the rhythm, a subtle change in the tone. It was as if the music had grown a layer of complexity that demanded attention. The audience leaned in instinctively. Some closed their eyes, letting themselves be carried away by the melody, while others stared, trying to follow every motion of her fingers on the strings. Her hands moved with precision, yet there was an effortless grace in every note. She seemed completely at ease, as if the music flowed through her naturally. Without effort or hesitation, the tune started to tell a story without words. Each note expressed emotion in a way that touched the listeners personally. Some felt a quiet sadness, as if remembering a lost friend. Others felt warmth, like the comfort of a memory long forgotten. The music was both delicate and powerful at the same time. It invited the audience to feel, to connect, to experience. What had begun as curiosity was now something more profound. People were no longer just listening. They were participating in the music, feeling it within themselves. She added gentle pauses, moments of stillness that made the melody more poignant. Each silence gave weight to the notes that followed. The room responded naturally. Breaths slowed, and the energy became intimate and shared. Some audience members pressed their hands to their chests unconsciously. Moved by the emotion that seemed to grow with every passing moment, they could not look away. Every ear, every eye, every heart was focused entirely on her as she continued. The tune began to shift subtly, exploring new ideas without ever losing its essence. Small variations in timing, soft touches on certain notes, slight shifts in tempo, all were intentional. The audience noticed these changes, even if they didn't fully understand them. Something within the music spoke directly to their feelings. It reached past the surface, touching memories and emotions they hadn't expected to confront that evening. It was quiet, profound, and deeply human. Some of the listeners tried to analyze what was happening, to understand the source of the effect. One older man in the back leaned forward, as if to get closer to the music, his eyes glinting with a mix of admiration and disbelief. A young woman at the front clasped her hands together, holding back tears she hadn't expected to shed. Even those who had come with casual intentions, thinking they might drift in and out of the performance, were now fully absorbed. They were present in a way they rarely experienced, caught by something they could neither name nor predict. The melody began to grow in emotional intensity, though it never became loud or forceful. It was a gentle crescendo, an expansion of feeling that invited reflection. The tune was simple in structure, yet each note carried depth and intention. People who had doubted her were now captivated, unable to resist the pull of the music. It was as though she had opened a window into a part of life that had been hidden from them, showing them the beauty in simplicity, the power in subtlety. Occasionally, she glanced at her instrument, her eyes soft and focused. She didn't look at the audience. She didn't need their approval. Her performance wasn't about recognition. It was about expression, about connection. And yet, every listener felt the impact. The air in the room was thick with unspoken understanding. Everyone knew that what they were witnessing was rare. The quiet skill and emotion she displayed were remarkable in their honesty. It was not flashy or dramatic. It was real, and that made it unforgettable. As the tune evolved further, she introduced delicate variations that brought a sense of narrative to the performance. The melody felt like it was telling a story of struggle and hope, of moments lost and found. Listeners could imagine their own experiences within the framework of her music. A man in the back, who had been skeptical at first, now rested his forehead on his hand, overwhelmed by the feelings evoked. A woman at the front let a soft sigh escape, tears forming at the corner of her eyes, moved by memories the music had stirred. Each moment was carefully measured, yet natural. The performance wasn't forced. It didn't feel rehearsed. It felt alive, responsive, and entirely present. She seemed to breathe with the music, allowing it to guide her fingers and heart. The audience responded in kind, their attention undivided. Even minor distractions in the room, the rustle of clothes, the quiet cough seemed to vanish under the weight of the performance. There was only the music and the shared experience of it. She maintained a subtle balance between technical skill and emotional expression. Notes flowed smoothly, but each had a slight tension that drew the listener in. There were moments of surprise, small turns in the melody that nobody anticipated. These shifts caught people off guard in the best way, deepening their engagement. They weren't just hearing music. They were discovering it, experiencing it alongside her. It was a shared journey, yet intensely personal for every individual in the room. The room felt alive, yet calm. People moved slightly in their seats, adjusting to the music without realizing it. Fingers tapped lightly, heads swayed subtly, and a few closed their eyes to absorb every nuance. She had managed to create an environment where the audience could fully immerse themselves. The energy was quiet, yet powerful, a collective acknowledgement of the rare talent before them. This was more than entertainment. It was a moment of connection, of understanding, of pure human emotion. She continued with deliberate focus, letting the melody grow richer with each measure. Small embellishments, subtle harmonic changes, and gentle shifts in dynamics kept the audience fully engaged. People who had doubted her abilities at first now sat in awe. Some whispered softly to companions nearby, expressing disbelief and admiration. Others simply remained silent, letting the music speak for itself. There was no need for commentary. The performance transcended words. Occasionally, she would pause for just a fraction of a beat, allowing the previous notes to resonate fully before continuing. These moments of silence were powerful. They gave space for the audience to process, to reflect, to let the emotions settle. The effect was profound. People felt seen, understood, and connected through the language of music. They experienced the complexity of life in a few minutes of simple, yet masterfully performed melody. By now, the room was completely absorbed. No one was talking, no one was checking their phone, no one was distracted. Every person present was drawn into her performance, aware of each note, each pause, each subtle shift. The energy was palpable, a quiet electricity that flowed through the room. It was clear that something extraordinary was unfolding, something unexpected, something unforgettable. As the tune continued, it began to evoke a sense of shared history and collective memory. Listeners found themselves connecting not only with the music but with each other. Eyes met across the room, nods were exchanged, and small smiles appeared as people recognized the power of the performance. There was a shared understanding that what they were experiencing was unique, a moment that would stay with them long after the evening ended. She maintained a steady, unassuming presence. Her body language was calm, her expressions minimal, yet every movement was deliberate. She didn't need to command attention. Her music did that naturally. The audience responded instinctively, drawn into her world without resistance. Each person felt the performance as if it were speaking directly to them, and yet it remained universally relatable. The simplicity of the tune allowed each listener to interpret it in their own way, creating a personal experience within a collective one. As part two of her performance reached its midpoint, the audience was fully engaged, captivated, and emotional. The music had grown in depth, yet remained accessible, simple in form, but profound in effect. Listeners were fully immersed, experiencing a range of emotions from quiet contemplation to subtle joy. The room, once casual and skeptical, had transformed into a space of awe and shared wonder. She continued to play, knowing exactly how to maintain the audience's attention without overwhelming them. Every note, every pause, every subtle shift was intentional. She guided the listeners through the story embedded in her simple tune, taking them on a journey that was both personal and collective. The room had become a space of quiet magic, a space where human emotion, talent, and connection converged. By the end of part 2, the audience was no longer just watching a performance. They were participating in it, feeling it, living it. The simple tune had revealed itself to be a powerful tool for connection. Capable of stirring deep emotions and creating unforgettable memories, the room was alive with quiet energy, anticipation, and wonder. People were ready, even eager, to see what would come next. Knowing that the journey she had begun was far from over, the moment she continued playing, the room seemed to breathe along with her music. The melody, which had already captured attention and emotion, now grew into something richer, something deeper. The audience could feel it without knowing why. Each note carried a weight that pulled at memories, feelings, and experiences that people hadn't expected to encounter that evening. The atmosphere was heavy with anticipation, yet it was gentle, like the calm before a revelation. It was a warm evening, the kind where the air carries a mix of excitement and calm. The small hall was crowded, though not overly so, with people gathering for what many thought would be just another music session. Some had come with friends, others alone, but most were there to watch familiar faces perform and enjoy a casual evening. Among them, she arrived quietly, carrying only a small instrument case that looked ordinary enough. She didn't speak much, didn't draw attention, and had no flashy clothing or expensive accessories. She simply walked to the corner of the room and set her case down, her eyes scanning the small audience, taking in their expressions. From the very beginning, people underestimated her. A few of the audience members whispered to each other, laughing quietly at her modest appearance. "She's probably just another beginner," one said. "Just a simple tune," another added, as if that was all she could do. Some rolled their eyes, others barely glanced her way, already convinced there would be nothing impressive about her performance. She overheard none of it, focused solely on her instrument, and adjusted a few small things, her movements careful and practiced. It was clear she knew what she was doing, but it wasn't obvious to anyone else. When she finally lifted her instrument and said, "I'll play a simple tune," the room's energy shifted slightly, though not in her favor. The phrase made some smile condescendingly, while others nodded politely, thinking it would be a short and forgettable performance. She smiled faintly herself, a small, almost secretive smile, and began to play. The first notes were soft and plain, almost too simple to be noticed. They were clear, yes, but unassuming. The audience shifted in their seats, some still talking quietly to one another, expecting nothing more than background noise. Slowly, almost imperceptibly, the music began to change. The simple tune revealed tiny flourishes, small gestures of skill hidden in its subtle rhythm. People who had been chatting stopped, their ears tuned to the sound, the flow of the notes, the slight variations that seemed to weave a story. They still didn't know the depth of what they were hearing, but a sense of curiosity replaced their initial dismissal. The room, once casual and unconcerned, became quiet. Eyes that had wandered now focused. Faces that had been distracted now leaned in. She didn't rush the music. Each note had space, each pause a purpose. The audience began to notice the emotion behind her playing, even if they couldn't explain it. Some closed their eyes, letting the melody reach into them in a way that surprised them. It was a simple tune, yes, but it had weight. It had feeling. It was as if she was telling a story without words, letting the music carry every thought, every memory, every small fragment of her experience. A few skeptics tried to remain unimpressed, but even they couldn't help it. One by one, heads turned, conversations stopped, and silence began to dominate the room. It wasn't the kind of silence that comes from boredom. It was the kind that grips you, makes you stop breathing a little differently, and forces you to listen. The music, still gentle and simple, began to grow in subtle intensity. Each note connected to the next with precision, each pause creating anticipation. It wasn't loud or forceful, but it held power. She kept her eyes slightly lowered, focused on the strings beneath her fingers. She didn't glance at the audience, didn't seek recognition, and yet every listener felt the pull of her performance. Faces reflected surprise, curiosity, and even wonder. People who had whispered and laughed were now leaning forward, unsure how a simple tune could feel so complex, so alive. Some were touching their chests, as if to make sure the feeling they were experiencing was real, not imagined. The music started to paint pictures in people's minds. Each person imagined their own stories, their own experiences, all mingled with the melody. A memory of a lost loved one, a moment of personal triumph. A childhood day remembered in sharp detail seemed to flow naturally from the simple arrangement of notes she played. There was no rush, no dramatic gestures, only the honesty of her skill and her emotion. It was impossible to look away, impossible to ignore. In the back of the room, few people exchanged glances, their expressions changing from mild interest to amazement. One woman, who had been scrolling on her phone, set it down and leaned forward. A man who had smirked initially now stared, his jaw slightly dropped. Everyone was quietly realizing that the performance was not simple at all. There was something beneath the surface, a depth and mastery that wasn't immediately obvious but undeniable once discovered. She continued to play, each note deliberate, each transition smooth. There was no need for showmanship, no need for dramatic flourishes. The power of the music came from its truth, from the way it was played. The room became completely silent except for the melody, and in that silence, every listener felt something personal awaken. Some felt a stirring of joy, others a hint of sadness, but all were affected. What had begun as a performance people expected to forget quickly had begun to etch itself into their memory. As the tune progressed, tiny variations began to appear. Subtle changes in rhythm, unexpected shifts in tempo, delicate nuances in volume. People noticed now that this was not a simple tune at all. It was a carefully crafted expression, a living, breathing story played through strings. The audience was holding its collective breath, caught off guard by the skill, the emotion, the honesty of what they were hearing. She never once looked around, never once sought validation. Her eyes stayed on her instrument. Her hands moved with quiet precision. It was as if she was performing for no one, yet giving everything to everyone. The effect was electric. People leaned in, some closing their eyes, some gripping the edges of their seats. Every person in that small hall was connected in that moment, united by the simple tune that was anything but simple. Even as the performance continued, there was a sense of calm. She wasn't trying to shock anyone, to impress anyone with speed or complexity. The magic came from honesty and control, from the way she let the music breathe and speak on its own. Listeners felt privileged to witness it, caught in the spell of her playing, realizing that they had misjudged her. What they had assumed would be forgettable, almost trivial, was instead profound. Some in the audience whispered quietly to themselves, unable to contain their surprise. "I didn't expect this," one muttered. "Who is she?" Another asked. Yet, she didn't need an introduction. Her music spoke for her in a way words never could. Every note conveyed a sense of mastery and emotion that left the crowd stunned, questioning how such a simple tune could have such an effect as she played the final segment of this part of her performance. The mood in the room shifted completely. Skepticism had turned to awe, indifference to admiration. People who had arrived with low expectations now sat in disbelief, caught off guard by the talent and emotion that had emerged. There was no applause yet, no cheers. Just quiet, respectful listening as everyone tried to take in what they had witnessed. Still unsure how to respond to what felt like a revelation disguised as simplicity, the last note lingered in the air, delicate and precise, fading gently into silence. For a moment, the room seemed frozen. Some opened their mouths to speak, but no words came. Others simply sat, letting the echo of the music settle into their minds and hearts. There was a feeling of shared amazement, a quiet understanding that they had just experienced something rare, something unexpectedly beautiful. She lowered her instrument slowly, her hands steady, her expression calm. She didn't look at anyone in particular. She didn't need to. The room's energy had shifted without her having to say a word. People who had underestimated her now looked on in quiet admiration. They realized silently that the performance had already changed the way they thought about her. She had come in quietly, played a simple tune, and in doing so, had begun a journey that none of them would forget. That was only the beginning. The crowd had yet to witness the full depth of her talent, but the seed of shock and admiration had been planted. What everyone thought would be a forgettable, ordinary performance was now becoming something unforgettable, a story unfolding in real time, note by note. She had not yet finished, and yet she had already captured every eye, every ear, every heart in that small room. The first part of the evening ended with a silent acknowledgement that something remarkable was happening, though no one could yet guess how far it would go. The moment after the first part of her performance ended, the room remained still, as if holding its breath. The audience was caught between disbelief and anticipation. No one moved. No one spoke. People looked at one another with wide eyes, trying to make sense of what they had just witnessed. Some whispered softly, careful not to disturb the fragile moment. "Did you hear that?" one asked. Another simply nodded, unable to find the words to explain the mixture of emotions rising inside. The music had drawn them in quietly, yet completely. She looked at her instrument, adjusting her fingers gently, preparing for the next part. She didn't speak. There was no need. The crowd, already captivated, waited for what would come next. The silence in the room was not uncomfortable. It was charged, filled with expectation. Everyone had begun to realize that this wasn't just a simple tune, as she had called it. Something deeper was emerging, something that promised more than they had imagined.